And U.S. stocks are coming off their worst day since the start of the war with Iran. The Dow and the Nasdaq lost nearly 1,000 points combined, while the S&P 500 dropped 1.7%. And while the stock market isn't the U.S. economy, Americans are feeling the impact of the war. The national average for a gallon of gas is $1 more than it was just a month ago. Plus, a new economic forecast projects U.S. inflation could increase to 4.2% this year. A major factor in all of this has been the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that critical waterway for oil exports as well as other goods like fertilizers, which will drive up the price of food and other items. But yesterday, President Trump downplayed the impact of that closure. Watch.
They're affected. The amazing thing is we don't need the Hormuz Strait. We don't need it. We don't need it at all. We have so much oil. Our country is not affected by this. We have twice the amount of oil as Saudi Arabia or Russia, and soon it'll be 3 times the amount.
Here on set with me, former governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee. Governor, thank you for coming on. I want to just first get you on gas prices. You look in your home state, and when we say 2:30 out west, I think specifically of you being here extra early. What do you think the actual impact of this is for an American public that we started the show talking about how the White House hasn't sold them on this conflict at all? You're a former member of Congress. Congress didn't get to approve it. And then governors are dealing with spiking prices in their home states.
Well, listen, every so often, about once every 6 years, Donald Trump says something that is true. And he said something that was true yesterday, was he doesn't care. He fundamentally does not care because he doesn't have to balance your budget and balance having milk for your kids and buying a gallon of gas. And because he does not care, he's got us into this war that is a result of dramatically reducing the ability of people to pay their rent and get food for their kids. These are huge price increases. It's gone up $1 a gallon. That is a big hit on families. And it's persistent, and it's not going to be short. And he is just so out of touch with reality, first with families, and second with economics. Because the fact of the matter is oil is an internationally traded good. And when there is a reduction of supply anywhere in the world, it affects the price of oil, and it affects what we pay at the pump. So I don't know whether it's worse not caring or being ignorant about basic economics. But one way or another, he's hurting Americans, and he's hurting my state, and I'm not happy about it.
I want to stay focused on oil and gas because the conversation we're having is one of affordability, but you're also focused on this issue in a different way. It's why you're here in Washington, putting on your old congressman hat, visiting with some of your former colleagues. And you're here talking about accountability when it comes to the ongoing climate crisis and the ways that some in the oil and gas lobby are trying to push for something that has been moving very under the radar, but that you're almost likening yourself to Paul Revere when you go and talk to your colleagues. So why are you here, and why Paul Revere?
Well, there's a risk, and the risk is that the oil and gas industry is going to try to get above the law. They are trying to get an immunity provision from Congress, or they may be trying to do this in the last days of this session, perhaps in reconciliation, that would put them above the law. And nobody is above the law in the United States. The oil and gas industry should not be able to put the costs of the pollution associated with their product onto the American people. And the sad fact is, for decades now, they have known that their product causes lots of costs, forest fires, hurricanes, asthma, and yet they have tried to fool the American people in thinking that there's some issue about this when it is clear. Their own scientists for decades now, for 5 decades now, the oil and gas industry executives have known that their product is going to cause catastrophic consequences associated with climate change, and yet they've tried to deceive the American people like the tobacco industry did in trying to create some doubt about this. They've been what we call merchants of doubt. So there are now lawsuits where Americans are holding these companies to account, and that accountability is very important for us to keep the judicial system functioning as a part of democracy. You ought to be able to go in and have your case and have a jury assess the situation.
Yeah.
They're afraid of that. So we're concerned they're going to try to sneak something in the dead of night in this process in the last few days, because that's what people do when they want something in Washington, D.C. that the American people don't like. American people don't like anybody trying to say they're above the law. So that's why we're here, blowing the whistle. Paul Revere, take your metaphor.
But I also think that this is one of those stories that's hard, right? Because it's presupposing something that hasn't happened yet, but when it does happen, it'll move really, really fast. And you bring up the comparison to the tobacco industry, where there can be some accountability because those cases were able to be heard in court. but with a potential for a rule like this or a law like this that would basically shield the oil and gas companies from any accountability on climate justice, it could put them in the way of gun manufacturers, frankly, right? I mean, this is a real inflection point.
Well, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So that's what I'm showing here today. Being in the nation's capital, I flew out from Seattle to be vigilant about our rights. And one of those rights is to have your day in court, have a jury assess potential accountability. And if you've been wounded by some industry, have American judicial system respond to this. But they're afraid to have to be in the witness box and being shown documents from, 1968, 1975, where their own scientists told this industry that they're going to cause potentially, and this is a word in their documents, catastrophic changes. But instead of being honest with the American people, they went out and ran million-dollar campaigns to try to fool people into thinking there's uncertainty about the climate science. And now we've still got a climate denier in the White House,
I was going to say,
which is simultaneously allowing this pollution to occur and also taking away the ability to have cheaper energy. Right now, the cheapest energy in America is solar, wind, and batteries. But what have they done? They've tried to take away the access of Americans to the cheapest source of energy. Why? Well, there was a $1 billion corrupt deal at Mar-a-Lago where the oil and gas industry is another one said, hey, Mr. President, give you $1 billion. Maybe you can cut off Americans' ability to get this cheaper source of energy. So people are paying 13% increase. Electrical bills are now paying $1 more for a gallon. They're paying through the nose. And what Trump is doing to try to help care of his cronies is say, fine, I'm happy for you to pay more energy. He's now said it 3 or 4 times. It's quite remarkable for an American president to say he doesn't care about having to pay more for energy. We care.
Basically trying to give himself a little bit more leeway to figure out the off-ramp to this war with Iran. I will say, Governor Inslee, you have been laser focused on climate issues. I covered your 2020 presidential campaign. This was centered around that. It makes sense to have you back here in Washington talking about these issues, still putting them at the forefront. I thank you for coming on and talking about them with us.
Be alert.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee on Way Too Early. Thank you.